highly decorated. Did a little hell raising when he was a kid, but nothing serious. He's defending his wife.
1997 was a brilliant year in cinema. It was a time when blockbusters thrived one after another, from the tidal wave of Titanic to the epic tale of Con Air. Con Air was more than just a movie. It was a cultural phenomenon, a masterpiece born out of an incredible concept. And while it seemed to be a guilty pleasure on the surface, with time it proved to be way more. The movie gave us explosions. It gave us Nicolas Cage, fresh from his Oscar win, and it gave us the stellar and immortal line, "Put the bunny back in the box." For many decades, fans have quoted the film, celebrated it, and accepted it fully, quirks and all. But what if the story we know is just half of it? What if the chaos on the screen translated to what was happening behind the camera? From bizarre auditions to tragic on-set accidents, we're uncovering 25 secrets on Con Air, hidden for decades, that reveal some of the most shocking, most hilarious, and dangerous stories. Let's get started. A terrifying real-life Con Air flight. Before it was an action movie, Con Air was a very real and frightening experience. For one, the film's beginning came directly from a screenwriter named Scott Rosenberg, who, in the name of research, boarded a flight with the actual Justice prisoner and alien transportation system. This was by no means a mere Hollywood fantasy. JPATS was a newly formed agency established in 1995 to consolidate prisoner transport, and it was immediately nicknamed Con Air by those in the system. For 3 days, Rosenberg observed the Con Air system and the convicts on the flight, which inspired him to write the screenplay for the film. He later described the experience as deeply unnerving. "These guys were in a terrible mood," he recalled, noting that the flight had taken place just before Christmas, and it only made the tension worse. He observed the hostility and the uncomfortable conditions of men at their worst. It was, in his words, very unsettling and a bit terrifying. Regardless, this exposure gave him the authentic and gritty foundation he needed for his script. However, during research, he hit a central wall. When he asked the real JPATS officials if the takeover he was planning for his script was remotely possible, they laughed and insisted that the kind of security breach in the movie could never happen in real life. They then gave him the most essential creative advice he would ever receive. They said the only way to make it happen was to let his imagination run wild, and so he did. Jerry Bruckheimer gave the film heart. When the script landed on the desk of legendary producer Jerry Bruckheimer, he saw the potential it had, but he also saw a fatal flaw. While the writing was pretty sharp and compelling, he felt it was missing an essential ingredient that all his blockbuster films had: heart. The weirdest part is that the film's production was a significant part of Bruckheimer's career, as it was the first film he produced on his own following the tragic passing of his longtime partner Don Simpson in early 1996. So you see, Con Air was a big deal to him. It wasn't just another movie. It marked the start of his solo career and held sentimental value. When I read Scott Rosenberg's project, I saw great potential, but I instantly surmised that the script needed more heart. It had to be more character-driven, Bruckheimer recalled. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was integral to the film's success. He worked closely with Rosenberg and director Simon West to give the characters more dimension. The story was then repurposed as a modern-day hero's remarkable odyssey. It was a story of redemption that revolved around a man who made a mistake and was fighting his way back to his family. Taking this route made the film what it is today, and it is the very essence of the Bruckheimer effect. It was an $80 million gamble on a Rickroll director. To make this cinematic masterpiece, Bruckheimer did what no other producer would have probably done. He didn't give the project to an experienced director. Instead, he made the bold choice to hand over the $70 to $80 million blockbuster to Simon West, a British director who had never even made a feature film in his life. West's entire resume was filled with television commercials for brands like Pepsi and McDonald's, as well as music videos. Most famously, he was the man who directed the video for Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, inadvertently creating the weapon for the internet's most famous prank, the Rickroll. Believe it or not, this was a typical behavior for Bruckheimer. It was a strategy he had used before when he hired another music video director, Michael Bay, for Bad Boys. He admired people with a great visual style, and he sought to hire directors who could bring a fresh and polished aesthetic to the big screen. For West, this was an opportunity of a lifetime, and he showed that he could achieve greatness on screen. In an interview, West said, "I really wanted to work with Jerry. He is an exceptional man who gives you total freedom." Nick Cage had a Southern gentleman's makeover. Nicolas Cage had just won an Academy Award for Leaving Las Vegas, and he was also just fresh off filming his first-ever Bruckheimer collaboration, The Rock. So he wasn't just a random actor who was cast for Con Air. He was, in fact, a significant part of creating and building his character, and he played a role in taking Cameron Poe from a generic hero to a memorable one. It was Cage who actually suggested that Poe should be a decorated U.S. Army Ranger, and it was this detail that gave the character a more profound sense of honor, thereby leading to the addition of the film's entire prologue. To make the character even better, Cage decided to travel to Alabama. He wanted to have the whole Southern experience and perfect Poe's signature Southern drawl. His dedication to the character was what made every line and every act powerful. Cage didn't want the character to be just another muscled-up hero of the 1980s. He wanted a quirky, emotional, and sincere action star, and he delivered every bit of that in his performance. Cage made sure to create a hero who was both a force of nature and a deeply feeling man, and this was the exact combination that made his action career as legendary as it is today. The original darker ending and extended scenes. The version of Con Air most viewers saw was the result of careful and deliberate tone negotiation. Hidden in the realism of editing and even in earlier script drafts was a much darker and more brutal film. An extended cut was later released on home video, and this cut was a harsher version that included scenes of a more graphic and violent nature. Additionally, it featured intense character moments that were cut to secure an R rating and broaden the film's appeal. These harsher moments that were cut out include a more detailed prison riot where Poe's friend, Baby O, receives terrible burns while saving him from a fire. There's another cut scene that has Johnny 23 making a disgustingly graphic threat against Poe's wife and daughter. Even the passing of Garland Green's guard was changed, and in the extended version, it is heavily implied that Green has quietly strangled the life out of the man beside him while the plane is in flight. These darker versions go all the way to the film's original climax. One early version of the script didn't end with a crash landing in Las Vegas. Instead, it ended with the jailbird crashing into the White House. These changes were essential for the filmmakers. Sure, they had all the elements to make a 70s-style action melodrama, but they wanted to create an epic 90s blockbuster instead. The A-list actors who almost played Cameron Poe. Before Nicolas Cage made the role entirely his own with his Southern charm and flowing hair, the part of Cameron Poe was actually one of the most sought-after roles in Hollywood. Producers considered major stars who had made the 1990s memorable with their action characters. So Con Air could have starred Arnold Schwarzenegger. Imagine a world where his Australian accent delivers the famous line about the bunny being returned to the containers. Then imagine Sylvester Stallone reading a heartfelt letter to his daughter. Truly, there were so many A-list options, from Bruce Willis, Tom Cruise, Johnny Depp, Brad Pitt, Keanu Reeves, Kurt Russell, Steven Seagal, and Jean-Claude Van Damme, all of which were being considered for the role. Casting any of these names would have been a different film entirely, so the choice to cast Nicolas Cage was absolutely perfect. Sure, he wasn't yet typecast as an action hero, but he still brought a specific, unhinged energy that the role needed to be a significant success. The actors considered for Cyrus the Virus. If you think the list of actors considered to play the hero was impressive, wait till you hear about the actors that were supposed to play the film's sociopathic antagonist, Cyrus the Virus. The role required an actor who could be both terrifying and highly intellectual. So the very first choice for the part was actually the master of all cinematic villains, Gary Oldman. However, the casting net was actually cast far and wide, drawing in many of Hollywood's most revered performers. Imagine a world where Jack Nicholson was cast as Cyrus. Would he have crushed it? Or Robert De Niro? who would have brought some of his quiet intensity to the role. The entire list of actors that were considered sounds unbelievably impressive, almost like a fantasy league of movie star villains, from George Clooney to Sean Penn, John Travolta, Michael Keaton, Ed Harris, Willem Dafoe, Kevin Bacon, and even Bruce Willis, who was considered for both the hero and villain. At the end of the day, the role went to John Malkovich, who absolutely nailed it, so it's hard to picture anyone else. While the other actors would have been great, Malkovich brought a chilling and theatrical nature to the character. His performance was a genuine masterpiece, and he created a villain that felt like a genuine intellectual threat. There was a bizarre audition that scared the director. The search for the perfect Cyrus the Virus led to some of the most bizarre and perilous audition stories in Hollywood history. The filmmakers were looking for an actor who could play an outrageous and unpredictable menace, and many of the actors who came in to audition took that challenge to the most extraordinary lengths. Take Mickey Rourke, for instance. During his audition, he decided to go all out in embodying that character's unhinged nature. So in the middle of reading, he improvised by suddenly producing a razor-sharp Bowie knife. This surprise move both terrified and impressed the director Simon West, who saw in that moment the kind of danger he was looking for. While Mickey Rourke committed to the role, the producers passed on him. Then, another frightening incident occurred, this time during the audition of British actor Jason Isaacs. An assistant, at the director's request, gave Isaacs a gun to use as a prop during his reading. While Isaacs began saying his lines, he and everyone else in the room quickly realized that the assistant had actually given him a real and loaded firearm. Isaacs was left in an instant panic, so he carefully placed the gun on the table and instantly walked out of the audition. Some roles were written for friendship. When it comes to blockbusters, it's not every day that creative choices are made based on personal relationships, but for Con Air, exceptions were made. Turns out two of the film's most important supporting characters were actually created out of a friendship between the screenwriter and the actors he envisioned playing them. The screenwriter, Scott Rosenberg, was close friends with actors John Cusack and Steve Buscemi, so he wrote the roles of U.S. Marshal Vince Larkin and the serial killer Garland Green specifically for them. This wasn't a case of casting after the fact, it was the opposite, as the characters were actually created around the unique personas and strengths of those two actors. This was a pre-casting that actually had a very positive impact on the entire film. Knowing he was writing for Cusack, Rosenberg created a clever hero, a man who used intelligence instead of fists. Similarly, when writing for Buscemi, Rosenberg made a character that was both creepy and strangely calm. He knew Buscemi would be able to bring the weird character to life, just as he knew Cusack would deliver on the intelligent character. John Cusack's made one weird demand. John Cusack was honest about his reasons for joining the cast of Con Air. He saw the great advantage that came with starring in a major Jerry Bruckheimer blockbuster, and he was sure it would be a strategic move that would ensure he could continue making smaller and more personal films. However, in exchange for adding his indie credibility to the hit film, he had just one bizarre and very specific request for his character, U.S. Marshal Vince Larkin. He wanted him to wear sandals. More specifically, he wanted Birkenstocks. According to the screenwriter Scott Rosenberg, Cusack's demand was rooted in a desire to subvert action hero conventions. He was like, "I want to create the very first action hero who wears Birkenstocks," Rosenberg recalled. Charlton Heston wore sandals, and he kicked ass. "I want to do the same." So Vince Larkin became a character who spent the entire film in his comfortable footwear. It's a small detail, but it adds layers to the character. The script changed every day. The set of Con Air was as creative as you would imagine, and the script was constantly changing. Many of the cast and crew have confirmed that the screenplay was being rewritten on an almost daily basis, with new pages and altered dialogue arriving on set every morning. This was a nightmare for certain actors who needed to understand their character's arc. One of the actors who was frustrated by this whole process was John Malkovich. He found the ever-shifting narrative to be annoying and unsettling. The constant changes reportedly left him feeling confused, to the point where he claimed that he didn't know what his character was doing, what his character had done, or what he ultimately did. He wasn't satisfied with the process, to the point where he was reluctant to participate in the press for the film. When asked why he made the movie, his answer was blunt and straightforward. He had one word: money. While he was clearly frustrated off-screen, this might have been a great help to his on-screen performance. Malkovich had to navigate the chaos on set, and so did his character. Therefore, he must have channeled all that energy. Director Simon West described Malkovich's process as a series of wild, unrepeatable takes, one with a different voice, another with a distinct accent, none of which matched. At the end of the day, a flaw in production became the character's biggest strength. Dave Chappelle improvised most of his lines. While the constant changes of the script were annoying to some people, it actually created a space for one particular rising comedic star to shine. A young Dave Chappelle was cast as the arsonist Pinball, and he actually thrived in all the chaos on set. He already had a background in stand-up comedy, so improvisation was the name of the game in his line of work, which made him the perfect fit for a production as fluid as Con Air. He later confirmed that he improvised most of his lines in the film. In a production where the written word changed daily, improvisation became less of a creative choice and more of a way to keep going. Chappelle had the quick wit and sharp comedic instincts, so he was able to create many memorable moments in an instant, adding a layer of authentic, street-smart humor to the whole film. The Clint Eastwood homage behind the bunny, "Put the bunny back in the box," is most certainly one of the most iconic and most quoted lines from Con Air. It was a truly remarkable moment that perfectly captures the uniqueness of the film. Turns out it didn't come from the screenwriter, and it actually came from the mind of Nicolas Cage himself. In an interview, Cage revealed that he wrote the line himself as a deliberate homage to the legendary catchphrases of actors like Clint Eastwood. He stated that he was inspired by Dirty Harry's "Make My Day" and wanted to create his own version, but one that took that tradition and twisted it until it was super ridiculous. The idea for the stuffed bunny itself also came from Cage's contribution. Overall, Cage knew that making the line work needed a great deal of sincerity. He believed that if he delivered it with genuine emotion and absolute determination, almost like it was the most serious thing in the world, then it would be a moment of comedic and dramatic genius. Turns out he was right, and the line is funny because of that context. It was a testosterone-filled atmosphere. John Malkovich, a seasoned professional in the film world, found himself in a completely different environment on the set of Con Air. He later described the production as his first real experience working with a large group of men, and he stated that he found it both amusing and worrisome at times. The cast list was essentially a who's who of cinematic tough guys, featuring famous names like Ving Rhames and Danny Trejo, as well as other intimidating figures from outside the world of acting. The production filled the plane with former NFL football players, professional hockey enforcers, and fighters, and this created what Malkovich called a heavily testosterone-laced environment. This was a deliberate strategy that could be described as a form of method casting. The filmmakers weren't just hiring actors to play convicts. They were casting men with genuinely intimidating personas and backgrounds, men who actually carried an authentic feeling of physical threat. There was a tragic set death. Underneath all the chaos of the film, both on screen and behind the scenes, there lies a forgotten tragedy. During the production's shoot in the barren salt flats of Wendover, Utah, a fatal accident occurred, casting a dark shadow over the entire film. On August 29, 1996, a 39-year-old welder named Philip Swartz lost his life on set. Swartz was working on one of the Fairchild C-123 provider prop planes used for the film. This particular plane was not airworthy and had been brought to the location in pieces and assembled on a bus chassis specifically for the scenes of the aircraft taxiing on the ground at the desert airfield. Unfortunately, while Swartz was working underneath it, the massive prop plane shifted and collapsed, crushing him. Because the incident involved an aircraft, even if it was a non-flying prop, the National Transportation Safety Board was called in to investigate. The tragedy was a brutal reminder of the very physical dangers involved in large-scale and practical filmmaking. The film's closing credits included a dedication in his memory, in memory of Philip Swartz. The director's secret identity as a comedy auteur. For many years, critics and even the audience have categorized Con Air as an action thriller, and they've pointed out its inconsistent tone either as a charming flaw or an absolute weakness. However, according to the film's director himself, those views completely hit the mark of the film's intent. Director Simon West has stated in interviews that he has always viewed Con Air and most of his films as action comedies. He revealed that what actually drew him to Scott Rosenberg's script wasn't the promise of explosions or even gunfights, but rather the witty dialogue that drew him in. That's half the reason I did it. It was because of what people said in the script, rather than what the action was, West explained. He saw the dark humor that occupied the script, and also the quirkiness of the characters. From his point of view, he wasn't making a serious thriller that happened to have some humorous lines. Instead, he was crafting a fun story with a comedic foundation to support it. Looking back on it, what the critics saw as an inconsistent tone was actually a deliberate move from the director. This also explains why Dave Chappelle's improvisation was allowed, and why he loved the theatricality of John Malkovich's villain character. The dots were all connected, and the reason why Con Air is such a staple is that it is both entertaining and classic. The Jailbird was a Vietnam War workhorse. The iconic aircraft at the center of Con Air was the C-123 Provider, popularly called the Jailbird. Believe it or not, the Jailbird was as much of a character as any of the convicts on board were. However, when it was selected for film, it was actually a deliberate act of historical fiction designed for aesthetic impact. The real JPAT's Con Air service never operated the C-123. In fact, their fleet mainly was modified Boeing 737s and other smaller jets. The choice of provider wasn't based on real-life events. It was mainly an artistic decision. A modern 737, the kind used for commercial air travel, would have looked too familiar and clean, so the C-123 was chosen because of how rugged it looked, and also because it is a purely functional military transport with a long history. It turns out that it was actually a workhorse of the Vietnam War, used for various purposes, including airlifting troops and supplies. Utah's surface of the moon stood in for the desert. The film's second act is essential because it has a desert setting where the convicts land the Jailbird at a remote and abandoned airfield. While the location is supposed to be somewhere in the American Southwest, the scenes were actually filmed at the historic Wendover Airport in Utah, on the edge of the Bonneville Salt Flats. You might think the choice of location was just a matter of logistics, but it was actually a thematic decision. The director specifically chose the area because of its alien landscape aesthetic. It looked like the surface of the moon. The director once explained, "My idea was that it was perfect for the convicts who had been locked up for 10, 20, 30 years in little cells." This was a deliberate production design throughout, created to establish a powerful visual arc for the entire film. The story basically goes from the colorless and monochromatic world of the prison to the empty landscape of the desert, and then the hyper-saturated chaos of Las Vegas. The one-take casino crash was at a real hotel. When it comes to the climax of Con Air, there's so much that you don't know. For instance, in the climax where the Jailbird crashes on the Las Vegas Strip and then plows through the front of a casino, all of it was real. That scene is one of the most significant practical effects sequences of the 1990s, and the moment where everything was destroyed wasn't actually a digital effect, it was just real. The filmmakers then reached out to the hotel owners and convinced them to let the Con Air production team assist with the destruction. They were then permitted to crash a life-sized prop plane into the front of the actual casino tower. However, there was a catch. They needed to get it right in one take because they would only get one take. The shot was planned accurately, with multiple cameras capturing the action from every possible angle. The result turned out to be pure cinematic genius. The miniature magic of the Hard Rock guitar smash. While the impact at the Sands Hotel was real, the iconic moment right before it was actually achieved was hindered by the effects. We're talking about the part where the Jailbird's wing is shearing through the Fender Stratocaster sight at the Hard Rock Hotel. That part was done because of old-school miniature effects. The entire complicated sequence was created by visual effects, supervisor David Goldberg, and experts at DreamQuest Images, who chose to work in the real world rather than cyberspace. As Goldberg explained, computer-generated imagery doesn't work well for big physical reactions like crashing objects, so high-speed miniatures are the only way. His team went all out by constructing a massive replica of the Hard Rock sign. They also built a corresponding model of the C-123. To get the shot, the model plane was suspended on a wire between two cranes and then propelled by a pulley system powered by a Ford Bronco, sending it hurtling towards the sign at 40 miles per hour. The Vegas Strip was rebuilt in miniature. In order to capture the entirety of the jailbird's destructive landing, the visual effects team had to use a hybrid approach where they blended large-scale miniatures with cutting-edge digital compositing. For the shots of the plane going down the Las Vegas Strip, smashing lampposts and cars, they created a vast 250-foot-long miniature replica on the street. On this detailed set, they had to tow the C-123 model at high speeds and then choreograph the destruction as it bounced off the pavement and crashed through miniature obstacles. This was an excellent move on their part, and the high-speed photography gave a physical reality of the whole crash. Then, to ensure that it was all within an actual city, the miniature elements were combined with live-action footage shot of the real Las Vegas Strip. Using digital compositing techniques, the model plan was layered into background plates featuring real cars, real casinos, and real people running for their lives. The ending was a last-minute reshoot. As initially planned and shot, Con Air ended right after the crash on the Las Vegas Strip. At that point, Cameron Poe would have been reunited with his family, and the surviving villains would have been rounded up in the midst of all the chaos and wreckage. However, as the film drew closer to its release date, Jerry Bruckheimer felt that something was missing, and he believed the film needed an alternative ending. In April of 1997, just 2 months before the film's scheduled June 6th release, the entire cast and crew were called back to Las Vegas for a reshoot. A new action sequence was quickly written and filmed. The chase where Cyrus the Virus and Swamp Thing escaped the crash site on a fire truck, pursued by Cameron Poe and Vince Larkin on motorcycles. The director, Simon West, had already thought his work was done. He allegedly stated, "I thought I was done with this." In the end, while this was a risky move and an expensive choice, Bruckheimer's instincts were actually right. There was a Steve Buscemi problem in test screenings. In the original cut of Con Air, the character Garland Green, a calm serial killer, was played by Steve Buscemi, and he had a larger role after the plane crash. The initial edit had 4 scenes of Garland wandering away from the chaos, finding a girl playing by a swimming pool, and sitting down to have a tea party with her. However, when the film was shown to test audiences, the filmmakers discovered a significant issue, and it was a Steve Buscemi problem. The audience became fully invested in this strange and tense subplot, losing interest in the main action. The editor, Glenn Scantlebury, recalled that, at that moment, everyone in the audience stopped caring about the convicts. They just wanted to know what Buscemi was going to do. When Jerry Bruckheimer realized that this interesting side story was completely taking away from the film's whole third act, he decided to get rid of 3 of those scenes. The film won an Oscar nod and a Razzie. Con Air is one of the most unique films in cinematic history, and it has had a fitting award season run, earning nominations from both the most prestigious and the most notorious awards bodies in Hollywood. On one hand, the film was recognized by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences with 2 Oscars nominations, which it lost. Then, it was also nominated at the Golden Raspberry Awards, popularly known as the Razzies. It took home 1 award that was unique and fitting, an award for the worst reckless disregard for human life and public property. To sum it up, the fact that the film got an Oscar and a Razzie nomination is very fitting for the bizarre identity Con Air has. It was a film that possessed both technical perfection in its sound design and heartfelt emotion in its theme song, making it worthy of consideration by the Academy. At the same time, it was chaotic and over the top in a lot of ways that it got the attention of the Razzies, so much so that they invented a special category just to honor it. The director had a wild idea for a sequel. For many years, fans have demanded a sequel to Con Air, and they also wondered if the filmmaker would be able to top the craziness of the original. Well, in a 2014 interview, the director, Simon West, provided an answer that was just as weird as the film itself. He joked that he would only be interested in returning for a sequel if it was completely turned on its head. He had a pitch in mind, and it was Con Air in space. He explained the entire concept and spoke about a version where the convicts are all robots, or they would be reanimated as super convicts. He even brought up the idea of a plot where the good guys are bad guys and the bad guys are good guys. Something shocking, he said. There you have it, all the hidden secrets you didn't know about Con Air. What can you say about the movie? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this video, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe for more, and leave your favorite Con Air memory in the comments below.